With the DMP-A10 Eversolo introduced a flagship model, clearly again a step up from the DMP-A8. It has lots of features like room correction, R2R volume control, 2 separate subwoofer outputs and a display inside the volume control. But how does it sound? About 15 months ago I reviewed the Eversolo DMP-A6 Master Edition, quickly followed by a review of the standard version that was already introduced mid-2023. At the end of last year the DMP-A8 was introduced and reviewed by me and the rest of the world. I was impressed by them all, as was the rest of the world, apart from some cynical people that didn't trust the worldwide appreciation. I understand that, but it was clearly unjust. Arriving now is the €3,124 costing DMP-A10. Before we dive into the specifics, let's first see where it is to be used. In the video I will call the DMP-A10 simply the A10. The A10 is to be connected to an amplifier over either XLR or RCA cables. The amp has to have a pair of loudspeakers or headphones connected. The streamer also needs a connection to your router and over your router to the internet to play music from streaming services and play internet radio stations. If there is a NAS or computer holding music in your network, that can be played too. You can control the A10 using the full color touchscreen on the front, the infrared remote control that comes with it, and the Eversolo app on a smartphone or tablet. If you use an Apple computer running Apple Silicon, you can also run the app on that. If you have other digital sources like a CD player, that can be connected over either Toslink, optical or SPDIF coax. A TV can be connected over either Toslink optical or HDMI ARC. The latter lets you control the A10 from the TV remote when watching TV. Analog sources can be connected too, like for instance an FM tuner. The analog signal can be digitized and thus can make use of room correction or other DSP functions. Alternatively, you can keep the analog inputs analog. Instead of an integrated amplifier, a power amplifier can be used and switched on and off by the trigger output on the A10. Alternatively, active loudspeakers with built-in amplifiers can be used too. These can be connected over SPDIF or analog output on either XLR or RCA cables. The A10 has a black anodized aluminium housing. The front and rear panels have sloping corners on the sides with in between them cooling profiles. It measures 430 by 310 by 117 mm and weighs 8.8 kilograms. On the front we find a standby button and a 6.5-inch full-color LCD touchscreen, on which later on more. On the right we see a small LCD screen inside the volume knob, indicating the volume setting and the active input. It also states R-to-R, which has nothing to do with the DAC inside, but with the way the volume is controlled. A ladder network of resistors controlled by a microprocessor that switches on relays depending on the desired volume. This is a very nice way to precisely control the volume in the analog domain. Around the screen the volume knob, designed with triangular surfaces. On the back left we see the IEC mains inlet that accepts any AC voltage between 110 and 240 volts, 50 or 60 Hz. Above it the fuse holder and the power switch. The latter is only needed for if you intend not to use the A10 for a longer period. Normally you use the standby function on the front. Further to the right we find a ground terminal, a trigger input and a trigger output. The latter two can be used to have the A10 switch on another device like a power amplifier or have another device switch on the A10. Then the SFP cage, short for small form factor pluggable. Here you connect an SFP module for when you want to use a fibre network connection. I'll come back to that. Above it we see an isolated USB-A port that outputs USB audio class 2. Somewhat higher the socket for the supplied Bluetooth antenna. The Ethernet connector can be found here, with above it the Toslink optical output. Further to the right, two USB 3 ports, one OTG port for connecting to a smartphone and can be set to function as a normal USB port, and one for USB media that can also be used for a USB measurement microphone. Above it the SPDIF coax output. The first of two Wi-Fi antennas is situated here. A USB-B port is where you connect a computer to if you use it as music player. The HDMI ARC port connects to the HDMI ARC output on your TV to play TV sound over the A10. The TV remote then also controls the power, input and volume of the A10. Then we get digital inputs. Toslink optical 1, SPDIF coax 1, Toslink optical 2 and SPDIF coax 2. Above it the second Wi-Fi antenna socket. Finally the analog I/O, unbalanced input 1, unbalanced input 2 and balanced input. To the far right two separate analog subwoofer outputs, the unbalanced outputs and the balanced outputs. All unbalanced connections are on RCA, the balanced ones on XLR. In the bottom of the A10 is a small cover that, when opened up, allows the insertion of two M.2 NVMe 2280 SSD drives. The maximum capacity is 4 TB per drive. Directly behind the mains inlet there are components that filter the AC and provide automatic voltage selection. The A10 has two linear power supplies and those normally have to be set on 115 or 230 volts depending on where you live. Usually that is done by the manufacturer prior to shipping. It is done by switching two primary windings in series for 230 volts and in parallel for 115 volts. The circuit here senses the voltage input and automatically switches the primary windings parallel or in series. On the same circuit board we find two toroidal transformers, one for the digital circuits and one for the analog circuits. From there the low AC voltages are sent to the circuit board that holds the electronic components to convert AC to DC and does the first voltage regulations for the group of circuits. Further regulations is done locally near the circuit it powers. All digital electronics is situated here. Against the back a small board is used to connect a number of ports. Below it we find the circuits for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. In front of it, below the cooling profile, is the streaming engine. Then to the analog electronics that can be found here. There is no galvanic connection between the digital circuits and the analog circuits. The connection between the two is over these isolators. The analog inputs are digitized here and, like signals coming from the digital circuit, are sent to the AKM microprocessor. This is where the DSP functions are done, including the filtering for two separate subwoofer channels. All is clocked by two oven-controlled crystal oscillators, one for 44.1 kHz based sampling frequencies and one for 48 kHz ones. Close to it we find the ESS ES9039 Pro DAC chip. That does the digital to analog conversion. The analog signal is then sent via these op-amps to the relays here. These do the volume control by switching the appropriate number of resistors in the circuit. And everything after the DAC chip is done balanced, so the audio is transported over a positive and negative voltage around the ground level. Finally there is some buffering and mute relays, after which the signals are sent to the outputs. Eversolo streamers have the most comprehensive user interface I know, and the A10 user interface is even more extensive. There are two layers. You use the first layer on the touchscreen, The second layer can be seen on the app on your smartphone or tablet. Giving the larger screen as stated, the menu options and underlying layers are shown simultaneously. On the smartphone you have to go back one screen to the main menu. And you can select the option to use the screen menu of the A10 on your smartphone or tablet. I'll show you the iPad app here. After the start you have to add the device by selecting Add Device and follow the steps. I have already done that for my DMP-A6 Master Edition with B-Technic power supply and the DMP-A10 on review here. Selecting the A10 brings you to the main menu. Let's start with settings. Here you can change the settings for the outputs, like the reconstruction filters. I prefer minimum phase. Balance, startup volume for when you use it as a preamp, and so on. For each analog input you can choose to keep the signal analog or have it digitized so room correction and other DSP functions can be used. The subwoofer outputs can work in mono or stereo mode. The crossover frequency, level and polarity can be set. For the SPDIF and Toslink outputs the DSP functions can be engaged or bypassed, and so on. It has a very good USB output with its own settings. For the display 4 meter displays can be chosen. 2 of them look like peak meters, the other 2 like VU meters. Eversolo still don't realize that VU meters use VU as units from volume units, so it shouldn't have dB in their scale. But the entertainment value isn't less because of it. Let's pick one more setting, language. Take your pick. Little chance your language isn't among them. Opening the streaming menu shows all streaming services that the A10 can work with. You do need subscriptions for most of them, but internet radio, Radio Paradise and podcasts seem to be free. Let me show you Tidal. You see all usual playlists and other moderated collections. Finding an artist, say Peter Gabriel, is easy through the looking glass. Qobuz shows its own selections and menu options. Internet radio starts with local radio but offers all kinds of other selections. If you have music stored on your computer or NAS, that can be played too, of course. The volume holding the music must be shared on the network. Then in Music select Library and add the folder holding the music. The A10 now starts to index the music and that can take quite some time depending on the size of your discotheque. When you select for instance albums, you see your albums. You can have them sorted on airtime, album date, album name and artist name. If you want the sound character changed or filter out problem frequencies, the A10 has sufficient filters and EQs to do that. There is a parametric equalizer that lets you set frequency, gain and Q factor for 10 frequencies. You can set a low pass filter, for instance if you have a turntable with built-in preamp connected, or have the highest roll-off. You can compensate for a difference in distance between you and the loudspeakers. For background music you can use a compressor and there's a loudness function that works under -15 dB. The DSP gain of -5 dB is done to prevent overshoot filters might cause. I left one tile unmentioned, FIR filters. This is where you can load an externally made file with room correction information. Eversolo suggests using REW software and a UMIK1 measurement microphone to do that. It is quite elaborate, but the result is pretty good. Eversolo also offers a simpler solution you can do with your smartphone or tablet. With the use of a UMIK1 measurement microphone or using the microphone in your smart device. Let me show you how it is done using an iPhone. In the app select room correction and select the microphone. If you have the UMIK1 connected to one of the USB 3 ports on the rear of the A10, you select that. For this demo I used the iPhone mic. Then a pink noise is heard after tapping play sounds. Using the volume control of the A10, set the volume to reach a sound level between -60 and -20 dB. I would say just below -20 dB to minimize influences of non-relevant sounds. Then tap next while holding the iPhone at your listening position. A frequency sweep is played, first over the left speaker and then on the right one. After the measurement, the A10 calculates correction curves which you then can add to your configuration. As said, you can use any DSP function to any input. For instance, have the TV sound emphasize speech. Let me, to finish off room correction, remark that both the REW software and the A10 room correction use amplitude corrections only. More advanced systems like Direct Live do amplitude and time correction and will give an even better result. Then something about the SFP cage and fiber optic networks. The obvious benefit of fiber optics is of course galvanic separation, which can give sound quality improvements. But to become an optical signal, the electric signal has to be converted. This is done in a so-called media converter that holds an SFP module. Both the media converter and the SFP module have influence on the sound quality. When I tested the Sonora Optical Render Deluxe, I was rather surprised the sound quality difference between the €25 media converter and the €467 costing Sonora optical module that has the same function. According to Sonora, the SFP module is also critical, but since there is little price difference between them, I would suggest you use the one I use, for I know it works good. Fiber optical networks use two fibers for one connection. There always is one sending and one receiving port, and you have to cross the fibers so they go from a sending port to a receiving port. The analog outputs of the A10 were connected to the Air Acoustics AX520 amplifier on OVA EQ feed over Grim Audio SQM XLR cables. I've tried both using the Air as integrated amp and in processor pass-through mode, in which it functions as a power amplifier. The PNC FAC12 signature loudspeakers on Stack Audio OVA 70 isolators were connected over AudioQuest Robinhood Zero loudspeaker cable. The connection between the A10 and the Zixel GS1900-10HP switch was over the Network Acoustics Eno 2 system Ethernet filter. Access to the internet was over the Zigno business modem that is connected to the Zixel over a Cat6 patch cable. Also connected to the Zixel is the Sonic Transporter i7 CDR that runs Minim Server and Roon Server. An iPad 2 was used to control the A10 over the Eversolo app and Roon over the Roon Remote app. All equipment was placed in a Creative Trend 3-3 rack. The A10 is something special. It has a generous stereo image, average resolution across the entire band, a slightly woolen low end while showing very little jitter phenomena. So no harsh voices, clean sibilance and the already mentioned generous stereo image. Good focus too. But what I liked so much is how it involves you in the music, like you rarely hear in this price range. It's one of those devices that make it difficult to stop listening, which by the way is killing for a reviewer. So if you are a neurotic high-ender searching for ultimate resolution, ultra focusing and so on, this might not be your streamer. But if you buy it for music enjoyment, music fascination, music emotion, this might be a very good investment. This was a rather long video that took me a lot longer to investigate. And still I haven't described all possibilities and features. It is packed with clever solutions. Want to use a shelving filter on an analog 1 input To reduce the noise a bit coming from your cassette deck? No problem. Want to accentuate speech on the HDMI input for better intelligibility? Easy. Want analog too, which has a turntable connected over IAA preamp, go analog to the outputs? Sure. Want the same user interface as the touchscreen on your smartphone? No problem. And in the beginning you are assisted by a setup routine and info tags. And did I mention the metal back of the infrared remote? I have seen rather lower quality remotes with the €12,000 equipment. And on that bombshell we come to the end of this video. There will be a new video next week, so subscribe to this channel or follow me on Patreon, Facebook, LinkedIn or Instagram to stay informed on when new videos are out. Help me reach even more people by giving this video a thumbs up or link to this video on the social media. It is much appreciated. Many thanks to those viewers that support this channel financially. It keeps me independent and lets me improve the channel further. If that makes you feel like supporting my work too, the links are in the comments below this video on YouTube. I'm Hans Beekhuyzen, thank you for watching and see you next week. And whatever you do, enjoy the music.